of how you go from part-time to full-time and how you find the time too, because that's something we all struggle with. And by the way, welcome to Spilling Ink. I pulled a Jason. I had to hit the button while people were talking.
And we're live. It's Saturday night.
Before, and it was a lot of fun.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Spilling Ink, the talk show that takes you behind the book to meet the authors and publishers in the publishing industry. And today we have got the awesome Jonathan Maberry here talking to us about writing, V-Wars, and everything in between, right?
Yep, a little bit of everything.
Welcome to the show. And for you guys out there, you might notice Jason's not here today. Everyone send him lots of hugs. We all have bad days, and today is his.
That's to you, Jason.
All right. So before we actually hit the big red button to go live, we were discussing a topic I think that's near and dear to all of us, which is finding the time to write and get it done with life, whether that be full-time job, part-time job, whatever, finding that time to actually get your novels written. And Jonathan, before you came on, you said you were on number 37?
I'm almost finished novel number 37, yeah.
Wow. All right. So what are your secrets then?
Well, a little bit of backstory on that. I mean, I went to school for journalism rather than creative writing. And journalism does not teach you to mythologize the writing process. You know, we don't wait for the muse to strike us. And you can't have a bad day if you're a reporter. I mean, imagine trying to tell your editor that you can't go and cover that 5-alarm fire because it's not speaking to you. You'd be working at Arby's next day, you know? So you're right. And the whole, you know, we were always trained, write it quick and dirty, fix it and rewrite. It doesn't matter how bad the first draft is. Truly does not matter. It could be bullet points of plot lines rather than an actual story, as long as something's on the paper for you to adjust. So when I started out writing, I was in my second year of college, and I took a magazine feature writing course. And I wanted to do, you know, features. So I started pitching to Black Belt Magazine and other places, you know, write what you know. And, you know, I was going to school full time. I was a bodyguard in nights and weekends. So I had like enough time to write maybe 250 words a day, 1 page a day. That was all I could manage, apart from my classwork and everything else. So I wrote 250 words a day. And at the end of, you know, X number of days, I have an article. You know, it's 8 days to write a 2,000 word article. So I wrote a 2,000 word article every 8 days and started selling them. And, you know, anyone who says you don't have the time is looking for massive blocks of time. Everyone has the time. I don't care what is happening in your life, short of brain surgery or being in labor, you actually have the time to write something every day. And so I have this little trick I use to get my word count going. First off, if I know, you know, back then, if I knew I was going to be able to do 250 words, I set 175 as my goal. And when I got to 175, I put a buck in a jar. And at the end of the first draft, I could only use that money for something fun. Could not use it for any bills or anything. Had to be for fun. If I missed a day, I had to take all of it out and put it in the bills. But the things that did for me, it's bribery, you know, yeah. But it equated writing with something worth being paid for and an actual paycheck, even though it was, you know, only a buck a day at the time. And also the word count was well below what I thought I was going to be able to do. If I thought I could do 250, I set a 175 word count so that I didn't feel pressured every day to get to that, you know, that max word count. So every day I'm not only hitting my word count, but I'm exceeding expectations. Nowadays, you know, I don't write anything unless I've been paid in advance for it now. So when I sit down to write, if I do my word count right now is about 4,000 words a day, right? So that when I'm not at a convention, I can do 4,000 words a day. But my goal was 2,500. So when I hit 2,500, toggle over to my online bank, put money on a vacation account. Not only is it positive reinforcement, as somebody just posted on this thread, which it absolutely is because I'm all about positivity, but also it's great for your family because if they know that they get to go on vacation with you at the end of the draft and that interrupting you may screw that up, they're going to, instead of interrupting you, they'll wait for a moment and say, how's your word count going? You know, they'll leave you alone. But now, I mean, I'm entering I'm a month and a half into the busiest year of my career. And this year I'll be writing 4 novels, actually 4 1/4 novels this year. 4 novellas, 3 30,000 word and 1 40,000 word novella, a story Bible for a potential TV show, at least 1 graphic novel, possibly as many as 3, and 7 short stories, and maybe 2 brand new comic books.
Holy
this
crap.
year.
And oh my goodness, that is a busy year. Holy hell.
Scares me too.
How do you compartmentalize though? Because when you have so many stories that you have to work on, do you go just methodically one at a time, or are you jumping back and forth between different projects?
Well, I do 1 novel at a time because a novel is so big. There's so much of it. It kind of hangs out like a big cloud in your brain. So I do 1 novel at a time. And the novel I'm working on now, Ink, it has to be turned in on Tuesday. And it's going to be turned in on Tuesday. And there's no way around it. I'm going to do that. But once that is done, the next novel will have between this one and the next one will have a gap. During that gap, I'll write a couple of short stories, and very likely do the pitches for the comic books that I've been invited to pitch for this new big comic book company. And then I'll dive into the next short story. The novellas, because they're a less complex storytelling structure, 30,000 words for a novella as opposed to 110 to 150,000 words, which is what my novels usually are, I can write that simultaneously. So what I'm most likely going to be doing is doing 2,000 to 3,000 words on the novel every day, and 1,000 to 1,500 words on the novella every day. So say 4,000 to 5,000 words, and the novella the first novella will be done in 1 month, even at that pace, and I'll still drive the novel forward quite a bit. So you have to be a good business person. You have to schedule things, and you have to hit your deadlines, and that's really critical for a writer. I mean, it's my job. If I was a plumber and I had 10 plumbing jobs to do, I couldn't just spend the day watching baby goat videos on YouTube. I'd have to go out there and turn a wrench. And by the way, I love baby goat videos.
That's true though, but the mental leap between projects is probably one of the hardest things. I mean, you can definitely allocate time to work on something during the day, but that shift between characters, sometimes that becomes confusing, or you get character details mixed up, or you get some storylines mixed up, and it's really hard. At least I've had a problem with doing that.
Yeah, and there are tricks for it. There's always tricks for everything. A couple of the tricks that I like using, I'll work on one project in the morning, and then go to the gym, and then have lunch, and then do a different project in the afternoon. That way, there's a pretty hard reset between my morning mindset and my afternoon mindset. I find that I write my novels best in the morning, and short fiction and comics I do better in the afternoon, and learn from experience. So I structure my day that way. That really is important to be able to change that mindset. That's a critical point, because if you're stuck in another story, or if that story is distracting you, you're not going to have the right focus to make the other project as clean and as interesting as it should be.
Yeah, I've done multiples at a time, and it is difficult. I find I'm much more productive when I'm focused on one, but when I'm doing standalones like I'm doing now, I have a really hard time transitioning from the end of that one to the start of the next one. I go through a haphazard period where I don't know which one I want to pick up next. I don't have the schedule like you do, of publishing with these contracts and whatnot. So it's like, okay, what do I want to do next?
I'm in the same boat with you, where we just finished our trilogy together, which was a really amazing experience. I loved writing with you, Jane. That was a fun. We meshed well. We made a good story. We made it quickly too.
Yes.
Now I'm in that gap, that dead zone where it's like, do I go back to Asset and write that series again? Do I start something new like we had talked about? And I'm at that roadblock of I can't make a decision.
Yeah. There are challenges also when you're doing series, because when like I'm about to do the next book I start will be Relentless, the new Joe Ledger, and I'm going to have to at some point reread or listen to on audio the previous book, because it's the first of I did 10 books in the original Joe Ledger series. This one begins a new group he's with. There's a lot of world building in that group, and so that new series. So I've got to go back and re-listen to it, which I find is the most accurate way, because you can't skip stuff.
Yeah.
And or sometimes listen to it while I'm also reading the book. and make notes so I can make sure the world building that I need carries through, and to get into that voice again. That's really important with series. With standalones, it's funny, those tend to be more. They tend to coalesce longer, and then they finally gel. I haven't done any standalones as I've done series books, and even Ink tends to have elements from other books in it. Still the Maberry verse,
Right.
So there are little Easter eggs here and there. So I have to kind of get into a certain vibe, but I find it easier to get into the standalone vibe. But I prefer writing series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love I get very attached to my characters, just like Katie does.
And you want to keep ever expanding in that world, and you want to find ways to tie it into other books that you've written, so that the world can become, like you just said, the Maberry verse. You want to create the wide universe with all encompassing, all of your novels, all of your novellas, and everything together.
Yeah, and there is a bit of postpartum depression when you finish a if it's the last novel in a series, or if it's a standalone you want to revisit, you've got those characters that they've become friends, and now they're gone, and it bums me out. I know when I finish Lost Roads, which will be the 7th in my Rotten Ruin series, comes out in August. It's written to technically be the end of the big arc that started with the first book. Mm-hmm. And yes, there are other stories I can tell, but that group of characters, most of that group of characters, wouldn't be in any next book I write, and I miss them.
Oh yeah,
quite a lot. In fact, it's even worse when he kills somebody off.
Oh yes,
Jane.
But,
I'm evil that way.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You love killing people.
We shouldn't be too sentimental about the characters. I mean, I go through a kind of a grief with it, and sometimes I'm even teary-eyed when I'm writing the scene. But if it really fits the story, that character has to go. He's standing on the trapdoor. But it is tough, because I mean, they're real people to us.
Well, and sometimes
not writing good books.
Sometimes you have to rewrite the entire book to save a character too. I've done that in one of my book series. I wrote a character meant to die. I wanted her to die. She was supposed to die. And by the time I got to the end, I was like, no, I need her. She can't die anymore. And then I had to rewrite the beginning and the ending of the book just to suit her not dying.
Yeah, I almost had that with the second book of my Rotten Ruin series, but you know what? I held fast. I stood firm, and it was probably because I around that time had a brief conversation with George R.R. Martin about sentimentality, and that is the least sentimental person. If I was a family member with him and the house was burning down, I would not wait for him to come and save me.
But you know what? That's what makes him kind of a notorious. You say his name and instantly you're like, oh yeah, he kills everybody. Don't fall in love with a character. He's gonna kill them. It becomes a game. You're like, oh, which one's gonna die next?
Yeah. And at the same time, you also have to make sure that when you are killing a character off, you're not doing it to get the George R.R. Martin effect or some stunt casting effect. The character that I killed off at the end of the second Rotten Ruin book, I had intended to kill him off in the first book. But then I kept him alive only because I felt he was useful, not because I was sentimental. Mm-hmm. And because I loved the character enough that people keep asking me to do prequel novels about him. And I've done prequel short stories, but, that's done. I'm moving on.
Fair enough.
Fair enough, yes. I'm the killing queen. George R.R. Martin is the killing king. So
George R.R. Martin Jr. at this point. Her advice to me when I'm soundboarding with her on a book, and if I'm stuck in a spot, she's like, well, just kill someone. Who can you kill? Let's list some characters. Who can we kill off? And I'm like, but I don't want
to kill.
Which I used to not care. And now I'm like, no, I like this character. I'm not killing them.
Don't take this personally, but consider therapy. I'm just saying.
Which one?
Me.
But writing is your therapy.
Yes.
Better you kill them on the page than in person. Just saying.
Yes.
Yeah. We're going to go with that.
There you go. Okay. So another one of the big questions I wanted to touch on tonight is everyone knows about V-Wars right now. It is fantastic. It's all over the place. The TV series, I believe, there it is.
Ooh, so there it is.
It was like an instant sensation. And I know I watched the entire series in one day. The minute it came out, I was like, and we're just going to Netflix and chill today.
V-Wars is an interesting project because it didn't start out as that. It started out as a Joe Ledger novel.
Okay.
Here's one of those examples of we have a really good idea for a story, melting polar ice releasing an ancient disease that causes some transformative threat, a biological threat. But the problem was, as I was developing it as a Joe Ledger novel, I realized it would change the world in too substantial and permanent a way.
Yeah.
And that would impact all the other books, which would prevent me from telling each book, have some unique element to it. So the idea kind of sat for about, 6 months. And I'd been asked to do, and this is weird, Max Brooks, who did World War Z.
Mm-hmm.
He was editing an anthology of G.I. Joe stories, a little cartoon characters, toys. And I wrote a story for him for the anthology. And then he wasn't able to do the next anthology for the company. So they asked me if I would like to do an anthology. And I said, sure, because I'd never done one before. I'd never edited an anthology before. And I wanted to do a shared world anthology because I love those. So I pitched something where I would write a 40,000 or 45,000 word framing story and then invite other writers to come in and tell the individual stories. And that's actually what the first V-Wars book is. My Luther Swan arc, is the primary arc in the story, but I brought in, a whole bunch of other writers to do incredible stories, and they did incredible stories. And we never expected it to be a TV series. We did 4 volumes of the prose series, and then a run of comics, which is collected into the V-Wars graphic novel collection. And we thought that was kind of it. And then IDW created its media division. The first show they did was Winona Earp, which is a really fun show.
Yeah.
And they had a couple other projects that didn't do as well as Winona Earp did, and they started shopping V-Wars, and I'm like, yeah, it's really great. It's not going to sell, but it's really great that they're shopping it. And then they sold to Netflix.
Netflix has been great because they take a chance on a lot of projects that you don't necessarily know if they're going to be commercially viable, and they turn out to be really interesting. Like they've hit a lot of home runs with Netflix.
Yeah,
they're doing the same too.
Yeah, and IDW has 2 other Netflix shows on right now. They have October Faction based on Steve Niles' comics, which is really great, and they have Lock and Key based on Joe Hill's, one of the best horror comics in the last 25 years, Lock and Key, and they did a bang up version of it on Netflix.
Yeah, I saw that the other day. I haven't seen it.
That's on my list. Yeah,
it's on my list too.
I definitely love Netflix, and I do like. I love what cable can do. Where streaming services can do. You don't have commercials, so instead of having those, you have to wait for that dramatic moment and then 7 minutes of commercials. It just flows.
Yes.
And also, I love binging. I'm also a binger. I hold several international records for binging TV shows. And also, they allow you to take a lot of creative risks, so they did a great job with it.
So let's talk a little bit about the writer, the author side of this, because we hear a lot about the production side, the TV, all of the actors coming on and doing all their interviews and promoting it. But as the authors, the original creator of that storyline, how involved were you, and did you get to be a part of this whole process as much as everyone else?
Yes and no. It's a complicated answer. Originally, when it was bought, I was not an executive producer. I was just the person who wrote the source, wrote and edited the source material and so on. But as the thing went along, first I got invited up to the table reads to when they were reading the first 3 episodes. Got to meet the whole cast.
That would be so
we
cool.
bonded really well. Ian and I have become really good friends, which is great. Laura Vandervoort's a good friend. Candace McClure and Adriana Holmes. It's nice that I've started making genuine friendships with these people. But I was not involved in the writing in the first season. Somewhere along the 3/4 mark, they started asking me for, some insights into the show. Because my wife and son and I were on the set for the first week of shooting, which was great, up in Sudbury in Toronto, north of Toronto. And, but I wasn't part of the writer's room. And I kind of was upset about that. I'm not angry, but I wanted to be part of it. really necessary to contribute. I wanted to see it. I wanted to be part of the creative process. And also I put a lot of, heart into the both the science and the politics and the ethics of this series. What happened is that IDW and Ian decided that I really should be an executive producer. So closer to the end of the production, they made me an executive producer on the show. Now the show was already shot, but I did have some input on story. And in fact, the first bit of homework I got was fun. They said, we don't necessarily like the titles of all 10 episodes. How about you watch the rough cuts and give us new titles? I'm like, well, that's never happened to me before. That sounds fun. Okay. I was at FanX in Salt Lake City, and I'm sitting there every night, going back, after panels and stuff, going back to my room, watching a few more episodes, coming up with titles. A lot of them are like Tom Waits song titles and other things. And that was fun. And I got to see the rough cuts of the show and got there's other areas of input. Should we get picked up for a second season, now that I'm executive producer, there's an extremely good chance I'll be involved in not only writing the show, but Ian and I are going to have been talking quite a bit about what we want to do with the second show in terms of its story structure. So most likely he and I will sit down and plot out a good part of the second season. Doesn't mean I'll be a regular writer of the show. Honestly, I don't have the time to do that. As I mentioned, my schedule's a little fruity this year. But they're thinking of moving the writers' room from Canada to LA, which is only 2 hours from here. So I can go up, every once in a while and sit in and brainstorm with the guys, and then let them go write their scripts. That would be great. And Ian wants me to hang out at his house for a while and just brainstorm this. And that sounds like it's gonna be fun because he lives. His wife Nikki's in the show. She plays his crazy ex-wife in the show, which is great. Yeah. Most adorable kid on the planet, and they have horses and dogs and cats and every other type of animal. So it sounds like paradise, so I'll probably go up and do that. And
now,
Ian,
when he, sorry, go ahead.
One of the things Ian and I want to do is we set up a lot of stuff in the first season, and we want to drill down into the elements of racism and intolerance, the psychology of what happens when somebody becomes the other to you, and the way in which politics often gets in the way of dealing with a crisis. So we're gonna really hit those hard, unflinchingly hard.
Okay, so that sounds exciting.
Yeah.
Now, I heard, and I can't remember where I heard in this interview that I listened to that you had done. You said there were some changes from the original book that were adapted specifically to make it screen worthy. And one of those changes was the dynamic between the doctor, Luther Swan, and the best friend wasn't the best friend initially, but you needed that because it created that bond that we needed to see
before.
Right. In the way it's structured, it's written like a bunch of short stories. You don't have the kind of book long character arc between two characters that you would normally get. Actually, the strongest arc in the books is between Luther and a character named Yuki Nitobi, who is a reporter, different than the character that's in the show. They had eventually became kind of a romance as the series went on, but that's where the real dynamic was. But Luther's character in the book was not a medical doctor. He was a folklorist who was an expert on vampires, brought in by the police when some guy was arrested for killing people in a way that made them think that he thought he was a vampire. So they thought that Luther would kind of help him work through this, his fractured worldview. It turns out the guy actually was a vampire. Mm-hmm. And, that was the character Michael Fain. So in the show, since those two guys are driving the narrative, they are the faces of both the human and the vampire worlds. They wanted them to be kind of like a Civil War story where it's brothers who were separated on either side of the war. I think it was a brilliant idea. It works really well on television. I'm not sure I would have wanted to do that in the books, but it works great on television. And also, there's a budget issue too. I mean, TV shows are expensive. To shoot the book, there's a thing called a line producer. A line producer goes and budgets out everything. To shoot the book as written would cost about like $30 million an episode, and that's more expensive than Game of Thrones, so that's not happening. So instead, everyone thought that was a really good idea to drill down and focus on those two as kind of like brothers, and also the family dynamic. In the comic, Luther's son is killed like off stage, so we never actually get to meet him. So here we get a chance to see his son, his current wife, and his ex-wife, and so the whole thing it's a really fractured family dynamic, split completely apart by the incidents of the show. and it was a good direction to go in. I like it a lot. By the end of the 10th episode, it's actually circling back around to some directions I went in the comics. So we'll be able to do more stuff from the show, or from the books rather, in the second season than they were able to do in the first.
That makes sense. That's interesting, though.
I love
it. You know.
One more time. Sorry, you cut out there.
I said there are a lot of moving parts in this. A lot of people have insight, and a book, it's you and a laptop. You're the god of the universe. In TV, there are hundreds of professionals involved here. The script writers, the showrunners, the producers, the directors have input. Even the cinematographer has input on the way certain things goes. So each one of them brings a game. Brings real skills. You don't want to close any of them out by saying, no, there's only one vision of it, and that's my vision, and that's it. I already have my vision of it. That exists already. This is the shared vision of the TV version of it. So I didn't go all prima donna and say, oh, they're changing my book. They're not. My book is unchanged. They did a TV series that is inspired by elements and characters in the book, and they did a great job.
And the fact that you get to have some input on it is good. And I know a lot of authors that try and go that route get zero input. They basically sell the rights, and that's it. That's the last they see of it. Maybe a byline on an end credit or something.
Yeah, and it depends also on how much you want to be involved. Like George R.R. Martin was pretty involved in Game of Thrones early on, but he found that the writer's room process takes so much of his time, he would rather be back working on the novel that we're all waiting for him to write, or we'll feed him to dragons.
Yeah. What is George doing right now? Not finishing the book.
He's chained to his desk right now. Is where but I have a bunch of friends who have had TV shows. Charlene Harris is one of my dear friends, had True Blood, and True Blood diverged from the Sookie Stackhouse.
Oh, drastically.
Ways. She was on the set. She got to meet people, but she didn't interfere in the storytelling process because she understood. And she's the one that explained a lot of this to me, by the way. Understood that they're doing their version of it. If people want to see the author's original version, they'll buy the book. And in fact, her book sold really well. My books are selling really well. It's a win for everyone.
That's an excellent point, because a lot of it's that curiosity, the what happens next or what should have happened. And people will go back and they'll find the original media to read.
Well, a great example of that is some people don't even know there is an original media until after the show is out. Dexter is a great example. Most people had no idea there's a series of novels by Jeff Lindsay. And the show does not resemble the books much at all, but it sold the hell out of the books.
Right.
So Jeff was able to be happy with that. He had a successful show that ran for 7 or 8 years, something like that. So, I mean, there's no downside to that. So,
yeah, I'm doing the same thing with The Expanse. Now that I know that there's a book series that television series goes with, I have to get those books. I have to find out what happens in the books, because I know they've changed some things, but that storyline intrigued me so much. Now I have to go back and read it.
Yeah, and I love The Expanse. It's 2 guys writing under the name of James Corey, and I can't remember their real names, unfortunately, but great series of books, absolutely fantastic. The show, to make the show really work, they had to take characters maybe from the second book and put them in the first episode of the first season in order for the dynamic of it to flow better. Because you can't put all of the backstory into the show. It's impossible. And those are thick books with a lot of stories, extremely dense world building in there. Literally, it's other worlds. So they had to shift things around. They made something that honors the original book without being an exact copy of it. And personally, I like that because having read the books, I want something to surprise me in the show.
Right.
And it does. So
that makes sense. That's a good way to look at it. And when you look at a book versus, a television series, or a book versus a movie, you're condensing all those words into something that's only going to be seen for maybe an hour. If it's a TV show, you've got like a 20-minute to 45-minute run per episode, maybe 10 episodes per season. You don't have a lot to work with, and you have to get everything important in there.
Yeah, I talked to Bob Kirkman about this a while ago when Walking Dead was first option for first purchase for TV. And he thought that they were going to do exactly the comic, because the comic is already storyboard and so on. And there are things that really are, but very quickly they diverged from that. There's a lot of stuff the first couple episodes that aren't in the books. And as a result, I can read the comics and have that storyline done now, but I can read them and enjoy all the way up to the end. Like I watch the show without having everything be a spoiler.
True.
Now, as far as, oh, sorry, Jane, go ahead.
I was going to say, and you now have the animated serial that's out there too for Rotten Ruin, right?
It's a comic book. It's a comic book formatted for your phone. Excuse me. And in fact, I'm going to tell you right now how many subscribers we have. It launched December or January 12th, I think, and we have 215,300 subscribers to it.
That's awesome.
That's nuts.
That's awesome.
Send me a link to that. We'll add that to the show notes.
Yes. I know I told my son about that because he's read all the Rotten Ruin books and we've got him upstairs. So
yeah, I love that series.
You got him reading. You were the one person who got him reading. So thank you.
That actually, the Rotten Ruin book won a lot of awards across the country in school districts and statewide as a book that gets kids to read, especially boys.
Yes.
And I didn't write it for that reason, but boy, I'm delighted that's a thing.
What age group are we talking here?
Well, it's 12 to 15. The characters are 15 years old, but we have readers. I've met readers as young as 9 and as old as grandparents.
Yeah,
my 8-year-old is a graphic novel style book reader. He doesn't like regular novels or regular chapter books. He has to have the pictures. And if he's got a book series that he likes that has a ton of pictures, he will tear through books. I've caught him reading at 10 o'clock at night when he's supposed to be sleeping, but it's got to be a book he likes, and he's very visual.
Well, I mostly learned to read through comic books too. I mean, and they've begun to understand that this is not everybody learns the same way. I'm a very visual person. I learn that way. And it's like DC Comics is doing a really smart thing where they're doing original graphic novels for middle grade and young adult. Ooh. DC Ink and DC Zoom, just for the school market. They're like superhero characters as teenagers before they got their powers, or maybe when they're just beginning to learn to use their powers, like Clark Kent. But their stories are not punch 'em up sort of stories. They're about characters, kids who realize they're changing and in a very complex world. Brilliantly done, getting top YA and middle grade authors to write them. That's fantastic. It's smart. But as far as me, I grew up reading. I was a Marvel kid. I got hooked on Marvel comics way back, and in the mid '60s or even early '60s, and I learned a lot from comics. And so we even have the Rotten Ruin webtoon is great. It's going to be about 60 episodes long. It's going to really faithfully adapt the book, but with some changes to make it work on comic, because you can't have a chapter where it's just word balloons, people talking the whole time. You can't do that in a novel. Right. So they have to be able to sell it more with the art. And this young artist, Yempe from Romania, is doing the art for us. She's amazing. And Taylor Grant is doing a truly brilliant adaptation of it. And we also, by the way, have Rotten Ruin movie in development with Alcon Entertainment. The people who did Blade Runner 2049 and Book of Eli, they're doing in fact, we're going up to LA very soon to have a nice strategy session about that. So that's going to be fun.
Now, is it all based on book sales, how books are adapted into the visual medium, or is it just somebody catches wind of it, it's a brilliant idea, and they want to try and make it happen? How does it... how does it happen for you?
Well, for me, I mean, I do sell a lot of books, but that wasn't the reason they caught fire. V-Wars, actually, it's funny, when the books first came out, the company that published the books, IDW, is primarily a comic book company. And they didn't have a standard, Baker and Taylor or Ingram distribution set up. So they were actually distributing the books to comic book stores, even though they're pros. So that was modest sales at first. But everyone loved the idea, so they decided to pitch it as a TV show, even though the sales weren't setting records or anything. Now the books are obviously selling better because of the show, but so sales weren't a factor there. It's timely. I mean, climate change is happening. Melting polar ice is actually releasing diseases. We know it now, and I started talking about it. We started writing V-Wars in 2011, and we were talking about melting polar ice and melting permafrost before that was part of the national conversation. So, it's not that we're visionaries. I tend to read the trade magazines in the science field that scientists are reading. So I see what they're talking about now, which will take a while to filter out in the public. I want to have that conversation, and we are having that conversation. We're talking about racism and intolerance and border issues, which were, factor in the book. And look at America right now. So, there's all sorts of troubles out there. So often, these stories speak to people who are receptive to hot button topics, or to topics they think they can tell a really good story in. There are, of course, some that sell that sell because of their sales numbers. I mean, if you get like The Martian, it was a massive independent book, and then it was published conventionally, and it was massive again. Of course, that's going to be a movie, and it's also cool. Yeah. So sales do matter, but it isn't the only factor.
There's another little nugget of truth I think that we should point out that you kind of glossed over real quick, and that was you started back in 2011 with this book idea. We're now in 2020 and seeing it come to fruition in the visual medium. So 10-year-ish time frame for something to, morph into this next level isn't unheard of.
Right.
No, not at all. And Rotten Ruin was published in 2010. Yeah. The Joe Ledger series started in 2009, and it's getting some film interest. I mean, it's had film interest a couple of times, getting some interest again. I did a graphic novel back in for Dark Horse Comics called Bad Blood in 2011, I think, and that's getting TV interest now. So it's whenever it catches fire, whenever it catches the right person's eye, that's when it's going to happen. And with V-Wars, they started shopping it, I think, in 2014. So it was a 6-year journey to the screen.
Wow. It's a slow-moving beast. But that's important to know, though. And for people who are watching or people who are listening later on our podcast, a lot of times they kind of expect things to happen overnight, or you hear about, success happening immediately. And a lot of times that success is on the back of years and years and years of labor that you don't see.
No, yeah. It's a really weird thing. It may be that the executive who is going to buy it when the book came out might have been in grade school. And 25 years later, he or she is working at Warner Brothers or Sony or someplace, and say, I love this book my whole life. Let's do a movie. Secret Garden, great example of that. The book's been out for 1 million years. And then finally the right person said, I grew up with this book. I love it. Let's make a movie. And they made a great movie out of it.
Yes.
So.
Important. That's good to know.
It's a slow moving train.
But it gives hope to people that, just because you're not successful today does not mean that something is not worthwhile.
Right.
We talked last night on Joe's Bar about imposter syndrome and how a lot of us suffer from it and what it is. And a lot of times it's just because we don't understand, it takes a while to make things happen. And sometimes it's embracing that imposter syndrome that makes you work harder towards success later.
And stay ethical and in your integrity as a writer. The worst thing that can happen as a writer who starts believing their own press that they're all that. And we're just book nerds who got lucky. We're writing schlubs. So I have friends who have spectacular books, and some of their books haven't been picked up yet. Doesn't mean the book is worse. Doesn't mean it's better. It just means that moment hasn't happened yet. So I don't believe that writers should get too high and mighty about themselves. Imposter syndrome hits all of us. Everyone I know who has real integrity as a writer, I don't care where they are on the bestseller list, gets hit with imposter syndrome.
That's nice.
You almost have to in order to continue to press on, because those who do, like you said, buy into your own press, you stop pushing so hard when you feel like you've hit the top.
The old saying, stay hungry.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have to stay hungry, but you also have to not have a distorted worldview. Too much ego and too little ego are distortions. Understanding, who and what your capabilities are, enjoying it, looking, to build toward greater potential. That's wonderful. But any distortion of your worldview also damages your business model as a working writer.
I can see that. As far as when you're okay. as a working writer, so you get your books out, you have to be out in the public eye at some point when you're doing conventions or you're trying to get on panels and stuff. When you've got that little bit of imposter syndrome in the back, how do you deal with that? How do you face the public when in the back of your mind, you're still going, oh my God, I don't know if I shouldn't be doing this.
I wrote one book and I was on a panel, it was like,
a lot of the newer authors, a lot of deal with this when, you finally do get into a convention and they say, hey, be on a panel for this. And you're like, oh my God, I'm on a panel. Oh my God, I'm on a panel.
One of the easiest ways to actually deal with that is be upfront about it on the panel. You can, say, hey, it's my first panel, or I can't believe I'm on the panel with all these guys. Actually share it with you and share it with the panelists. Everybody has, all of them were in that moment at some point in their career. All of the, I was on a panel at Dragon Con some years back, right after my first New York Times bestseller, The Wolfman. And I was on a panel with Sherilyn Kenyon, Charlene Harris, Kevin J. Anderson, Jim Butcher, and I think Larry Correa. So all these people have like all these bestsellers, and I had just gotten on the list. I had gotten on the list like a week before Dragon Con, right? And I'm on that panel, and when it came to me to introduce myself, I said, so even though I'm older than most of these cats, I'm the new kid on the block here. And I just hit the bestseller list, so they added me to this, because they needed some scrappy young kid to talk about what it's like to break in. And look at me, I look like a scrappy young kid, and it got a laugh, and we all had some fun with it, and it took some of the pressure off the more successful writers who didn't want to have to deal with my ego being either too fragile or too big. They saw where I was, and it's funny because every single person on that panel is now a close friend of mine. We went up bonding. We talked before and after the panel, and like Kevin J. Anderson, who's 165 novels he's done, including #1 international bestsellers. He's a really good friend of mine. I was just at his event in Colorado Springs a couple of weeks ago. Kevin's a friend. Charlene is a friend. Jim Butcher's a friend. And these are people who, I've read their books and so love them. I want to be like them. And now we're all talking about imposter syndrome on panels now.
I love that. And there is that, I don't know, when you meet other authors, there's almost that sense of you found your people, because you all share a lot of the same things. And, you get over the imposter side of it. You get over the fangirling or fanboying. And when you can just sit down and have a conversation, it's amazing just to sit in a room with other authors and just shoot the breeze.
It is. It is. In fact, I started this chain of things called the Writers Coffeehouse. Started this back in Pennsylvania 17 years ago. And it's writers sitting around talking about writing with coffee. And, we like I run the one in San Diego. We get between 50 and 100 people each month. And we have 19 of them now. And sometimes you'll have like a producer from major Hollywood films come down just to hang out with us. Sometimes you'll have somebody who picked up a pen yesterday and said, oh, I wonder what this does. And everything in between. Writers, we share a lot of the same fears, the same aspirations, the same challenges, no matter what level of the business we're in. And when we get to know that, it takes away the hero worshiping, and it's more like a bunch of friends. Now, the one thing I do, the one distinction I make, though, with the people in the biz is I have what I call the good guys club. And it's generic guy, male and female. It's anyone who is not demonstrably a jackass. Because I just like operating in the zero jackass zone. When I was a kid, Ray Bradbury gave me, I met him, I was mentored by him for a while, gave me his 10 commandments of how to be a great writer. Don't be a jackass, don't be a jackass, don't be a jackass. And I'm like, wow, that's really great. And, I don't do business with anyone who is a prima donna, anyone who believes their mythology too heavily, or anyone who's just in it for them and not for the other people as well. I don't view writing as a competition. It's not competitive. There's room for all of us. The more good books that get written, the more books there will be to attract a larger group of readers. Everybody prospers on that. Yeah. So I like to be the happy kid in the playground.
That's true. And you're not the first person to say that either. When we had Weston Oakes on, it was actually a couple of years back. I love him and his wife. They are adorable. But his golden rule was don't be an asshole. And I was like, yep. That's it. Just don't be an asshole.
Yeah, I was lucky.
Wes and Vaughn were among the first people I invited into my Good Guy Network because they are truly wonderful people.
They are
kind-hearted, big-hearted, generous, funny, and they don't take themselves too seriously, which makes them amazing.
No, and if one goes to a convention without the other, they always have the other one on a stick, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
We may have done pretty awful things with those heads on sticks. I'm just saying, just not. But yeah, I was just with them at a convention called TUSCon the end of last year, and we had such a great time.
Yeah,
I was lucky early in my career to find Backspace, which had that whole mentality, and
Backspace is great.
And I miss it, but that whole mentality has stayed with me. And you're right, it's everybody helping everybody else, and
the closest I see to that vibe, and it's actually really nails it, maybe even expands on it a bit, is Superstars Writing Seminar in Colorado Springs, which is Kevin Anderson's thing. This last year was Kevin and his wife Rebecca, Jim Butcher. Oh my God, there's a ton of us. James Artemis Owen, a whole bunch of us. And, Kevin doesn't like prima donnas either. So he likes people to come in there, help other people, help the new writers in, not set this big gulf between them and us because we're bestsellers. No. Plenty of room for all of us to play. Come in and play. We got weird toys.
I like your toys.
On our show, we mention a lot about finding your tribe. And finding those people that you can connect with, that you can, bounce ideas off of. I know, Jane, you and we're constantly messaging back and forth and going, I need a soundboard today. Just let me shoot some ideas at you and you tell me if this makes any sense. And she usually replies back, kill somebody.
Yeah.
That's what the Colorado Springs group calls their group, the tribe.
Yeah.
They're all the new newsletters go out to the tribe. And when I do anthologies like V-Wars, I mean, I started the people I reached out to, Yvonne Navarro, Wes Oakes, Keith Candido, Scott Nicholson, Greg Frost, James A. Moore, people who I knew were going to be easy to work with, fun to work with, but would also bring quality work to it, because it can't just be an affable personality. You need to have that skill set as well. So that's the happy medium, the balance between a really good set of craft skills, a good head for business, and that personality that demonstrates a generosity of spirit.
And the same applies too if you're going to do a co-authoring project, because Jane, you and I have talked about that too. That there's a lot that has to mesh in order for a co-authored book or series to work, and not even good friends can't always write together. It's got to be style, it's got to be vision, it's got to work in the same frame for that project to work together.
Because you want it to be seamless, not, if the styles are very different, it's not going to work.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I've done a bunch of collaborations. I did one that Larry Correa is a buddy of mine. Now, Larry and I are on opposite ends of the political spectrum. He's pretty strongly right. I'm pretty strongly left. If we talk politics, one of us will be dead on the floor. So we don't talk politics. So we were collaborating on a novella together for Urban Allies, an anthology edited by Jonah Cease.
Yeah.
And we worked really well together because we got put our business hats on, put our personal biases aside, and we wrote a really good story. And as a result, shortly after, I did an anthology of stories where I invited people to write about my Joe Ledger character, and he wrote one. And he did an anthology of stories about his Monster Hunter International group and invited me to write a story. Again, we don't have to agree on everything, but we should be mature enough to be able to get along.
Right.
The core ethics are there. The political differences, are individual.
And as long as the vision for the story is there, that's what matters.
Yes.
Yeah. And the ability to work with one another and respect the person and not judge everything that they do based on which lever they pulled in the booth.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, I think that's what society needs in general, is the ability to agree to disagree and move on to other things. We don't always have to fight about everything.
Yeah, that would be nice. We have moved out of that space. I'd like to see us move back to it.
Unfortunately. Well, and your novel, being very topical right now because of the whole political issue. You're touching on it, but you touch on it in a way that is acceptable to a lot of people. Sci-fi is brilliant for doing that too, where you can touch on social, political issues with aliens being real aliens or other creatures, different species, and it's acceptable. I can talk because it's not humans, it's not us, it's somebody else, and it allows for that understanding of opinion to come through.
A great example of this, there was one of my favorite episodes of the original Star Trek was Let This Be Your Last Battlefield. And you had two aliens who had, the last two of their planet. One was black on this side and white on the other. The other was white on this side, black on the other, but otherwise they're identical. And from anybody looking at them, they just look like two people who, are from the same race. But to them, the difference is insurmountable, and they had fought to the edge of extinction. Now, you could do that story in 1966 or 67, whenever it aired, about aliens. But if you tried to do an hour-long drama about the futility of racism, you would never have gotten it on TV. Science fiction allows us to talk about subjects that are otherwise uncomfortable, and we both know what we're talking about, so that we don't actually have to be, liberal or conservative. We don't have to be, any party. We both know what we're talking about, but we use the vehicle of it, the format of it, to be able to have that conversation. And that's what's made science fiction and fantasy endure for thousands of years in our culture. I mean, we've been telling fantasy stories. I mean, look at the first known piece of writing, the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's not straight reportage. I mean, his best buddy is a werewolf, so they took a few liberties. But the essence of what it is, the Iliad and so on, essence of what it is comes through. Yeah. And one other thing about politics and story in science fiction is, with V-Wars, we don't tell you what side to side with. We give you the deep points of view of each side, and it's on your own to decide where you land.
And the fallout of what happens when things don't go as they should.
And the fact that almost everybody makes mistakes on either side.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But good guys and bad guys on both sides, and some people caught in the middle on both sides.
Yeah, I love that. And the series, watching it again, brings me back to, I want to go read the rest of it now, because it creates that curiosity. But watching it all the way through the first season in one day and getting to the end, it's like, oh, come on, what have you done to me?
Yes.
So Netflix, renew it. Season 2.
Third, and Netflix plays their cards really close to the vest. They haven't told us, they haven't told anyone whether, what they're thinking, So we're all like, okay, and, I mean, we have the numbers. I mean, the show did really, really well.
Right.
But Netflix has its own decision-making policy. I'm not going to question it unless they don't renew V-Wars, in which case they're dead to me. But hey, I'm from Philadelphia. I'm fickle.
Yes, exactly.
All right, we do actually have a question from the audience, and this is more regarding getting published rather than producing videos or producing a TV series. So Chuck is asking us, what is the best way to go about being published when you don't have money to spend on it? So I'm assuming he's talking self-publishing, sitting on 2 finished novels and working on a third, and I keep hitting a wall with being published. So I'm wondering if they've tried traditional and haven't gotten any luck, so now they're looking at self-publishing.
Yeah, it's not an area I can advise on. I haven't self-published. I have a lot of friends who do, and I have also a lot of friends who are hybrid writers who do conventional or traditional and indie publishing. But that's a topic I couldn't advise on, except that I think you should keep trying agents. Maybe subscribe to publishersmarketplace.com. It's the only pay site I ever recommend writers subscribe to, because it's the easiest way to see who's selling what, because each deal listing names the agent who represented it. So you can make a very specific targeted list of the agents to pitch to. But that's about as far as I'd be able to go with the advice.
Yeah, the traditional side, you keep pitching to agents. It's and make sure you're pitching right, not like me when I started. I did my cover letter about me. The Roshan.
If anybody's listening to this goes to my website and just, you have to spell my last name right. It's Mabery, not May. Go to my website. There's a whole page of free stuff for writers. It includes notes on 3-act structure, how to write a synopsis, a sample query letter that has been tweaked by dozens of top agents and editors. So, and a bunch of other stuff, including comic book scripts and so on. It's all free downloadable PDFs. If you're going to pitch, use that query letter as a model. It is really what editors want to see come across their desk, because it takes your pitch from a love letter to your book to a business letter, because it is a business letter.
And of course, you can also look into the various options in publishing. Big Five and indie are not the only two out there. There's also the middle of the road option of small press publishers, and they come in different sizes and flavors. Some of them accept direct submissions. You have to find them and submit directly to them. A lot of times they have open calls. Be online searching for those things. Do
Sure.
PitchMad. Multiple times throughout the year on Twitter, they offer that, where you can do one sentence pitches to try and attract one of their editors to your story. Or if all else fails and you want to go the indie publishing route, do your homework and learn how to budget a book, because that's the biggest drawback is the budget.
And even with indie, there are some indie presses that actually are collectives of independent writers, and so that there's no advances or anything. Some of them require that you pitch in some cash toward it, and some it's depending. They recoup their expenses based on percentage of sales. There's a lot of different models for it out there. Running Wild Press run by Lisa Kastner is one. Kevin Anderson has his Wordfire Press, which is essentially that structure. And there's a whole bunch of these out there of different sizes. It's definitely worth looking into.
Absolutely.
What else we got?
No other questions so far. Good. All right. Well, we are actually coming up to the end of our time right now. So is there anything else you want to tell us about what might be coming up? Any events that you're going to be doing? Just anything that's in the next couple of months?
Yeah, well, I've got a bunch of events. I think the next big out of town event will be Philly Comic Con. I'll be doing. I'll be doing the Vintage Paperback show in Glendale, California, and WonderCon in Anaheim. I'll be doing all those, coming up soon. I've got a bunch of books coming out this year. I've got 2 graphic novels, I think, coming out this year. The trade paperback for Pandemica, the comic I'm writing now, will be out this year. And there's the other one I can't talk about. There's another possible one coming out.
Secret projects.
I've got Ink, the book I'm writing now, will be out in November. I've got Lost Roads, the last of the Rotten Ruin series for now, coming out August 25th, I believe, from Simon & Schuster. And then Relentless, the next Joe Ledger book, should be out either at the very end of this year or the beginning of next. And that will pick up shortly after Rage. And if you haven't read the Joe Ledger books and don't want to have to slog through 11 books, you can start with Rage, the book that came out last year, because it kind of starts a whole new phase of his career, reintroduces the characters and setups. You can jump into that. Rotten Ruin is being serialized on Webtoon. Go have fun with that. They did a beautiful job on it. And go to my website, look at my calendar, because I'm going to be bouncing all over the place.
I do want to plug Patient Zero, because that still is my favorite opening ever of any book I've ever read. So
the entire first chapter of Patient Zero is, if you have to kill the same terrorist twice in 1 week, there's either something wrong with your skills or something wrong with the world, and there's nothing wrong with my skills. That's the opening of.
Yep, and that is still
a good opening.
Yeah.
I like it.
Me in the shower. A lot of good lines come to me in the shower.
Isn't that's the worst place for it too? How do you write it down then?
Yeah, for a while I had one of those little divers things where I would make notes in the shower. I kind of wish I still had one of those, but they're useful.
Yes.
And Jane, how about you? What's coming up for you next?
My next book, Spindle, is going to be out in April. It's with my beta readers. So Katie's one of my beta readers.
I will read it this weekend. I promise it's on the list.
And then it goes to my editor in the middle of March. So I still have some work to clean it up, but I want to make sure I haven't left any, raging holes in it.
And of course, I'm still stuck in limbo, so I will be banging my head against the desk until the idea decides to come loose, and then I'll start working on it.
In March, we do have the trilogy, the 3 books coming, the box set coming out for our 3 books. So
I'm so excited to finally have that one out because it was such a fun project to write, and I'm still hoping we can come up with a way to merge the worlds again and find a new series to work with. But that one was absolutely so much fun to work on.
It was fun to write with her.
I just wanted to, something we didn't talk about during this is I actually sold a new series. I'm going to be writing epic fantasy next.
Awesome.
I sold the first books in the Kagan the Damned series, which is very dark swords and sorcery epic fantasy, and I have to deliver the first book at the end of the year, so that should be a bunch of fun.
Yeah, I saw that on your Facebook page. I was like, oh, that's going to be interesting and cool.
Bad things will happen to good people, and worse things.
I like that. I like that. Well, we are coming to the end of the show. I want to give a shout out to Creative Edge Publicity, our sponsor, who makes it possible for us to use this wonderful platform to stream to both YouTube and Facebook at the same time. Their slogan is "Your Brand, Your Future," because they are advocates for collaboration and believers in the partnership in the ever-changing literary industry. Contact Mickey today if you need any kind of publicity services for your next book.
Thank you.
And we'll put the links at the bottom.
And thanks for having me back on. This was a whole bunch of fun. You guys,
it is wonderful talking to you, and I love all the insight that you provide.
We should all be sharing this so that everybody gets into the playground. That's
absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, you are welcome back anytime you want to come. We would love to have you. Thank you so much for being here this week.
My pleasure.
All right. And for everybody else, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.